The kerosene lamp was already lit when the first contraction folded me over the kitchen table, its wick trimmed low the way Levi always kept it, throwing a circle of orange light no bigger than a dinner plate onto the oilcloth. Snow had been falling since noon, thick and wet, the kind that swallows sound. I remember the smell of it coming through the gap under the door, cold and clean, cutting through the smell of the beans I had left simmering and forgotten. I gripped the edge of the table and I did not cry out, because the baby was not due for 11 more days, and because some part of me still believed that if I stayed quiet enough, my body would listen and wait. It did not wait. By the time the second contraction came, 4 minutes later, water was already running down my legs onto the floorboards, and I understood, with a kind of cold clarity that has never left me since, that whatever happened in that kitchen over the next several hours was going to happen without the midwife, and it was going to happen the way my husband decided it would happen. My name is Rachel, and this is Rachel the Amish Midwife. I spent 31 years delivering babies inside my settlement in Holmes County, sitting at the bedsides of women whose labors I understood in my body before I understood them in my training, because I had lived one myself, the hard way, the way I am about to tell you. I did not become a midwife because I loved birth. I became a midwife because of what was done and not done in that farmhouse kitchen, and because I decided that no woman under my care would ever face what I faced with no one beside her who knew what they were doing. Before I go any further, if you are new here, subscribe and ring the bell, because these stories are the ones the community never let me tell out loud, and I read every comment, so tell me where you are watching from tonight. In the world I come from, a woman's labor belongs first to God, second to her husband, and only after that to herself. The Ordnung does not forbid a midwife outright, but it teaches, plainly and repeatedly, that calling an outside doctor for something as natural as childbirth is a failure of faith, a signal that a family does not trust the Lord to bring a baby into the world the way he has always brought babies into the world. The bishop said it to every young couple before their first child. A hospital is for the broken, not for the blessed. I heard that sentence so many times in so many kitchens that I stopped hearing it as a sentence at all. It became weather. It became the shape of the room. What that sentence cost in practice was this. A woman in labor did not decide when help arrived. Her husband did. And if the roads were bad, or the midwife was 2 farms over delivering someone else's child, or the bishop's voice was louder in a man's head than his wife's voice on the kitchen floor, a woman found out exactly how alone the Ordnung was willing to let her be. I was 22 that winter, married 14 months, and this was my first child. The midwife who served our district was a woman named Ada, sharp and capable, who had already been sent for once that week for a breech birth 3 farms south, and who was, at the hour my water broke, still there, unreachable by any means faster than a horse through 8 inches of snow. Levi had hitched the buggy within minutes of my first sound of real distress, but the road to Ada's had drifted shut in 3 places, and he came back 40 minutes later with snow packed into his collar and no midwife behind him. Only the news that we were on our own until the weather broke or Ada finished what she was doing, whichever came first. What my husband demanded in that kitchen, with me on my knees on the floor because the chair had become unbearable, was that I not ask him to go for the English doctor 6 miles the other direction, whose telephone we could have reached from the Hostetler barn in 15 minutes on a clear night. He did not scream it. Levi never screamed anything. He said it the way he said grace, low and final. He said, "I will not bring an outsider into this." He said, "This is our child and our faith, and I will deliver it myself before I let a stranger's hands touch what belongs to us." I said nothing. I put my forehead against the cold leg of the table, and I said nothing, because I did not yet have the words for what I wanted to say, and because some part of me, the part that had been raised the same way he had, believed he might be right. There is a woman I have to tell you about here, because her story runs alongside mine the whole way through, and I have never been able to separate the two. Her name was Miriam, my husband's cousin, married 4 years before me, and 2 winters earlier she had labored for 19 hours in a farmhouse 11 miles from ours, with a midwife who arrived too late, and a husband who, like mine, believed that waiting was faith. The baby did not survive. Miriam did, though something in her did not come back the same. She used to laugh loud enough to carry across a barn raising. After that winter she laughed quietly, if at all, and when I sat with her in the months before my own child came, she took my hand and she said, "You will know things about your own strength that you did not ask to know." I did not understand what she meant. I would understand it fully before that night was over. By the second hour, the contractions had closed to under 3 minutes apart, and Levi had done what he could with what he knew, which was almost nothing beyond what he had watched at a distance during his sister's births, standing outside doorways the way men in our community are taught to stand. He boiled water because his mother had once told him water should be boiled. He laid down clean sheeting his sister had sent over for the birth, folded and waiting in a cedar chest for 11 days already. He held my hands when I reached for them, and he prayed out loud, steady, unbroken, the same 3 verses over and over. And I want to be fair to him here, because fairness matters more to me now than it did then. He was not cruel. He was terrified and certain, in the way our whole world had trained him to be certain, that faith and fear were the same thing wearing different coats. There is a part of this story I cannot tell you here, not on this platform, not under these rules. The algorithm has limits, and I have learned exactly where they are. So, I wrote the rest down instead. Slowly, without the softening, without the cuts. Everything the camera is not permitted to show. The book is called The Births They Never Recorded. 46 pages of what I actually witnessed at those bedsides. No softening, no cuts. The link is in the first comment of this video. That is where the part I could not say out loud lives. By the 3rd hour, the baby had turned wrong. I know that now. I did not know it then. I only knew that the pain had changed shape, had moved from a wave I could ride to something that felt like being taken apart from the inside. Levi's face had gone the color of the snow outside the window. He knelt beside me, and for the first time that night his voice cracked, just once, and he said, "Tell me what to do." And I could not tell him, because I did not know either. And that is the moment I return to, more than any other, when people ask me why I became a midwife. Two people on a kitchen floor, both terrified, both raised to believe that the answer would come from faith alone, and neither of us with a single piece of real knowledge between us about what my body was doing. If this story is reaching you, take one moment to like this video. It means more than you know. And if there is a woman in your life tonight who is afraid to ask for help she is entitled to, tell her she is not the first. The lamp on the table had burned low by then, its oil almost gone, and Levi filled it once more with hands that were shaking too hard to strike the match on the first try. And I remember watching that small flame catch and steady itself, throwing its little circle of light back onto the ceiling, and thinking, with the strange clarity that comes at the worst moments, that the lamp knew how to do its one job better than either of us knew how to do ours. The baby was born at 11 minutes past 4 in the morning, and she was not breathing when she came, not for 11 long seconds that I have counted 1,000 times since. 11 seconds in which Levi held her wrong side up and patted her back the way he had once seen done to a lamb, and then she cried, thin and furious and alive, and neither of us said a word. We only looked at her. That is the quiet climax of this story, and it did not come with shouting or relief pouring out of us like water. It came in silence, the two of us staring at a small, wet, breathing thing on a folded sheet, both of us understanding without saying it that we had come far closer to losing everything than either of us would admit for years. Ada arrived at 6:30, when the road had finally been broken open by a neighbor's sled, and she checked the baby and checked me and said very little, though I saw her jaw tighten when Levi explained what hour the water had broken and what hour help had finally come. She did not scold him. That was not her way. She only said, quietly, to me alone, while Levi was outside unhitching the horse, "Next time, you send for me the moment it starts, whatever he says." I did not fully understand, at 22, that she was handing me a piece of permission I did not know I was allowed to want. What I did, eventually, years after that night, was become the person Ada had been for me. I began sitting with young mothers in my settlement the season after my second child was born, first only holding hands and fetching water, then learning properly, over 4 winters, under a midwife 2 districts over, who was willing to teach me past what the bishop thought a woman needed to know. I did not leave the faith to do this. That is important to say, because it is not the story people expect. I stayed inside the community, and I did the work from the inside, which cost me things all the same. 2 women in my own family stopped speaking to me for the better part of a decade, certain I had put myself above God's plan for labor. An invitation to my own brother's daughter's wedding never came. A letter I wrote to Miriam, after I finally understood what her silence over those years had cost her, came back unopened, twice, before I stopped sending them. I am not the hero of this story. I made mistakes inside my own marriage in the years that followed, mistakes born of resentment I did not know how to name, and Levi and I spent a long time learning to speak to each other about that night at all. And I will say this plainly, because it is true, and because the community I left pieces of does not deserve to be flattened into a villain. There was real love in that kitchen that night. A frightened young man knelt on a cold floor and prayed for his wife and child with everything he had, because it was the only tool he had been given. That was not nothing. It was simply not enough. If you want to keep hearing what the midwife was never allowed to say out loud, subscribe, because there is more of this story than one video can hold. It took me 11 more years before I sat across from anyone who could give me language for what had happened in that kitchen. I was 51, sitting in the small office of a counselor named Grace in the English town 2 counties over. Someone Ada had quietly recommended to women in our circle who needed to talk to a person with no stake in the Ordnung. I told her about the lamp and the snow and the 11 seconds my daughter did not breathe, and Grace listened without writing anything down for a long while. And then she said something I have never forgotten. She said, "What you're describing is called obstetric coercion, being denied timely, necessary care during childbirth because of someone else's authority over your body." I sat with that phrase for a long moment, turning it over the way you turn over a stone you have stepped past 100 times without noticing its shape. I had spent 30 years believing that what happened to me, and to Miriam, and to a dozen women whose bedsides I later sat beside myself, was faith. Grace had just handed me the outside world's word for something I had lived inside for so long I had stopped seeing its edges. I think of the lamp differently now. For years I told this story with the lamp as the thing that saved us, the small, brave light against the dark. I understand now that the lamp was never the hero either. It was just the only tool we had, the same as Levi's prayers, the same as my own silence. What saved my daughter that night was luck, and the strength of 2 frightened young bodies, and nothing else. And pretending otherwise for as long as I did was its own kind of quiet harm. If you grew up in a place where the people who loved you most were also the people least equipped to protect you, I see you. If you have ever knelt on a cold floor waiting for help that came too late or not at all, and told yourself afterward that it was faith and not failure, I see you. If you have ever loved someone who hurt you without meaning to, inside a system neither of you chose and neither of you fully understood, I see you, and I do not need you to hate where you came from to heal from what happened there. I do not hate the community that raised me. It gave me hands that know how to catch a falling child, and a spine strong enough to stay on a cold floor until morning, and I carry that with me still, alongside everything else. Tell me in the comments if you had your own Ada, the person who told you the truth when no one else would. I read every single one. What I carried out of that community, I carry here, so that what happened in the dark does not stay there.